on the world stage this Monday night. Leaders gather in Kananaskis, Alberta. What's on the agenda?
Mr. President, welcome to Canada.
And what happened when the U.S. president met Canada's prime minister one-on-one?
I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy.
Israel and Iran escalate their attacks, leaving the world on edge. Our Mike Armstrong is in Jordan tonight. And the manhunt is over.
His crimes are the stuff of nightmares.
How police caught a Minnesota man accused of assassinating a lawmaker and plotting to kill dozens of others.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight from Banff, Alberta.
We are in the Rocky Mountains, the stunning vistas of Kananaskis, Alberta, a beautiful backdrop for world leaders meeting at this G7 summit, where Canada's Prime Minister is at the head of the table and has high expectations.
We will have open, frank discussions over the course of the next 2 days. We might not agree on absolutely every issue, but where we will cooperate, we will make an enormous difference for our citizens and for the world.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are in Banff, down the road from the highly secure zone where the leaders are meeting. Here is who is taking part. The leaders of France, Italy, Germany, the UK and Japan and the U.S. also invited 8 countries that are not officially part of the G7, including India and Brazil. Now, late today, a new development. The White House press secretary announced President Trump will be leaving the G7 tonight because of what's going on in the Middle East. Trump will leave after the dinner with the other leaders. For Canada, so much of this G7 is focused on trade and Trump. The 2 leaders met in person first thing this morning. There was no deal today, but this afternoon, the Prime Minister's office did put out a statement saying there is now a timeline for a deal. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, is in Kananaskis. David, what do we know?
Yeah, well, the leaders, first of all, spent a long time talking. They were talking for 70 minutes, and of that, 30 minutes was just the 2 leaders, one-on-one by themselves. And afterwards, they came out and they've decided to have what they're calling accelerated trade talks, and they put a timeline on it, as you mentioned, get a deal in 30 days.
Mr. President, welcome to Canada.
It started off well, a little flattery from the host.
The G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership.
Gracious appreciation from the guest.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship.
There was no 51st state talk. Officials said it was respectful, productive, touching on many topics, but trade and tariffs were top of mind.
I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy.
Before Carney could respond, Trump jumped in again.
I think Mark has a more complex idea, but also very good. So we're going to look at both, and we're going to see what we're going to come out with something.
And then Trump held the stage for the next several minutes, offering up opinions about membership in the G7. He thinks Russia should never have been kicked out of the G8.
It was a big mistake.
And maybe China should be invited to join the G7.
Well, it's not a bad idea. I don't mind that if somebody wants to suggest China coming in.
And he thinks Iran is on the wrong side of its conflict with Israel.
I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
It was a freewheeling 10 minutes, and then Carney, all business, politely took over.
If you don't mind, I'm going to exercise my role, if you will, as G7 chair, since we have a few more minutes with the president and his team.
And all went well.
I think we're going to accomplish a lot, and I expect to. And I think our primary focus will be trade and trade with Canada, and I'm sure we can work something out.
So, David, some optimism. What is the assessment of how the meeting went from others who were in the room with Trump and Carney?
Well, officials are really upbeat about the meeting. Here's the Minister of Canada-U.S. Relations and Canada's ambassador to Washington. They were both in the room.
We collectively think we're making progress and coming to a deal that would be in the economic interest of both countries.
We feel a sense of acceleration in the discussions in the last couple of weeks, and that is a very good thing.
Now, one of the reasons that officials, Canadian officials, were feeling so upbeat is because of the tone taken by President Trump.
The president is very respectful of the Prime Minister and of Canada. He spoke many times about how much he likes it here, how much he likes Canada.
Now, what about the PM? Well, we are not going to hear from Mark Carney, who'll tell us all about this until his closing press conference tomorrow. But once when Carney was walking into a meeting today, a reporter yelled out, "Hey, how did that meeting with Trump go?" And Carney had one word: fantastic. Donna.
And David, this is much more than a trade meeting, of course. Peace and security are on the agenda, too. The world is on edge watching Iran and Israel. There's Russia's war on Ukraine. What are the expectations on those issues?
Yes, absolutely. Iran was a topic of discussion by all leaders today, either in their one-on-one meetings or as a group. Canada's not really a leader on that topic. Mark Carney more a facilitator of discussion. But Canada does want to lead in two areas when it comes to global security, and the first is Ukraine. Canada has been one of the strongest advocates for Ukraine's defense ever since that war with Russia started, and Mark Carney has invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky here tomorrow. It's the first session of the day with all G7 leaders and some of those other invited leaders. So that's one thing. The second thing is defense spending. Mark Carney wants to make sure everybody knows that he announced earlier this week or last week to say that Canada is now going to meet its NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. And so Carney's invited the NATO Secretary General here for a discussion. One wrinkle on that Secretary General, his name's Mark Rutte, he's been saying 2% may not be enough. NATO members, you might need to spend 5%. So we'll see where that discussion goes tomorrow, Donna.
All right, David, thank you. So no deal for Canada on trade, but President Trump and the British Prime Minister say they are signing a trade deal to slash tariffs on goods from both those countries. That deal does not include tariffs on UK steel. Alberta's premier is not taking part directly in the G7 meeting. Danielle Smith, though, as host of this province, was a part of the receiving line as G7 leaders, including President Trump, arrived at the Calgary airport. The two did exchange a few words. Our Alberta correspondent Heather Urix-West is with me. Heather, energy, electricity are on the agenda. What about oil?
Well, bitumen is certainly the priority of Premier Smith, but G7 leaders will be discussing emerging energy needs too, like the huge amounts of electricity needed to power AI. As Canada looks to become an energy superpower, it will need to make sure its investments today don't come with a risk of being left behind.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has gone so far as to talk about Canada as an energy superpower.
About 100 kilometers from Kananaskis, the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan, provinces where the energy sector drives the economy, are hoping to make their voices heard.
And I would say that the policies that we enact as a nation and at the provincial level, they do matter.
At a forum in Calgary hosted by an energy industry advocacy group, Smith and Moe spoke about the need for new pipelines, regulatory reform, and to repeal climate policies that restrict the growth of oil and gas. A constant champion for her province's biggest sector, who's been a frequent lobbyist in Washington and Florida in Trump's second term, Smith exchanged a few words with the U.S. president as part of an airport welcoming team. But the world's future energy needs will not be oil alone, with disagreement among analysts about whether global oil demand is truly set to grow.
I think the most important thing is not to be unhedged, where you've put all your eggs in one basket.
Instead, the incoming director of Energy and Natural Resources Policy at the University of Calgary says Canada and Alberta will need to focus on natural gas and critical minerals, while recognizing that artificial intelligence could see the world's electricity needs soar.
Particularly clean electricity to support kind of a G7 AI position, for fear that if we don't provide the right energy pathway in the G7 countries, that the industry will migrate to China.
Now, that's long term, of course. Right now, if we're talking energy, all eyes are on the Middle East. Weak oil prices rose dramatically last week when Israel launched strikes on Iran. They cooled slightly today in hopes of a de-escalation, but prices remain volatile, which could be an opportunity for Canadian crude. Donna?
All right, Heather Urix-West, thank you. Among the Albertans meeting President Trump at Calgary Airport was Stephen Crowchild of the Tsuut'ina First Nation. Crowchild said afterward he was filled with rage before Trump's arrival because he feels Trump has caused so much pain and suffering in the world. He was going to go home, but says he decided to stay after consulting leaders within his community. And the U.S. president ended up talking to him longer than any of the other people in that welcoming party. President Trump is reportedly planning not to sign a joint statement at the G7, calling for a de-escalation of the conflict between Iran and Israel. Israel's prime minister now says the Israeli military controls the skies over Tehran, and he won't rule out ordering the assassination of Iran's supreme leader. And late today, President Trump posted on social media that everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. Also today, Israel targeted the headquarters of Iran's state broadcaster while it was live on air. Vincent McAviney reports.
This is the moment live on air Iran's state news broadcaster was struck by Israel Monday. A loud explosion audible. The studio complex hit as the program anchor reported on the crisis. A bold attack on Tehran's messaging too, before fire gutted the whole building. For a fourth night, the skies over the Middle East were illuminated by artillery exchange. Again, Israel's Iron Dome system was overwhelmed, with Iranian rockets damaging homes, businesses, and a refinery in the port of Haifa. Hospital staff forced to move some of those already injured underground, with millions across Israel sleeping in shelters. Israel says that while it's strategically targeting nuclear and defense sites, Iran is indiscriminately firing on civilians like those in this apartment block and on non-military targets like this synagogue and school. The U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv also sustaining damage. Despite increasing deaths and injuries, Israel's president says they will not relent.
I call upon the leaders of the free world convening in Canada in the G7 summit. They all should stand up with us.
But Prime Minister Netanyahu has vowed to continue to victory.
We control the skies of Tehran. We strike these targets, the regime's targets, in contrast to the criminal regime of Iran that targets our civilians and comes to kill children and women.
Inside Iran, state news videos show long lines at gas stations as citizens seek ways out of larger cities, anxious about what may happen next. The Iranian regime continues to condemn both Israel and its closest ally, America. But in a sign of growing concern inside Tehran, tonight there are reports Iranian officials are reaching out to President Trump via Gulf neighbors to push for a deal that could bring about an immediate ceasefire. Donna?
Vincent McAviney, thanks. Travel across the Middle East has been disrupted because of the attacks by Israel and Iran. Airspace has been closed, flights canceled. Mike Armstrong is in Jordan tonight for us. Mike.
Well, Donna, the airport here in Amman was closed for a time at the beginning of this conflict. It has now reopened, but it's nowhere near as busy as it normally would be. According to one travel industry group, in recent days, the disruption has been widespread. More than 700 flights have been delayed or canceled in the region. Major carriers from British Airways, United, Emirates, Air France, and others are suspending operations or rerouting flights, not only in Israel and Iran, but in major hubs in Dubai, UAE, Jordan, and Lebanon. This was the scene in Beirut Monday. Hundreds are stuck, hoping to get out. This man says he's been at the airport since Friday, trying to get home to Germany. He waited all weekend and may be giving up. Now, all civilian flights have been suspended at Israel's main airport in Tel Aviv until further notice. 200 flights were canceled Monday alone.
We're looking for alternative places to stay because it may be a lengthy one. And so looking for like kitchenettes, some place to kind of reduce some of our expenses.
United Airlines is suspending flights to Tel Aviv through July. Delta is suspending them through August. Air Canada recently extended its suspension of flights to Israel to September 8th. But getting anywhere in the region is a little more complicated right now. We were on a flight into Amman today that made it through, but with a bit of a delay. The Royal Jordanian flight would normally travel through Israeli airspace. Instead, on this day, it came across the Mediterranean, turned straight south, and went around Israel. Donna?
Mike Armstrong in Amman, Jordan. Thanks, Mike. The Minnesota manhunt is over. Coming up, how the accused killer was caught and chilling new details from the FBI. This is Mount Rundle overlooking Banff. We are back from Alberta in a moment. The man accused of killing a Minnesota state lawmaker and her husband and injuring another state representative has appeared in court. He's charged with multiple counts of second-degree murder, second-degree attempted murder, stalking, and firearms offenses. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. Jackson Proskow has the chilling details of how police say he carried out the attacks.
The largest manhunt in Minnesota history came to an end Sunday night as 57-year-old Vance Boelter was arrested in a field near his home.
Today, the manhunt is over, but the investigation continues.
There are disturbing new allegations about an attack police say was months in the making.
This was a political assassination.
Investigators say Boelter visited the homes of 4 Democratic lawmakers Saturday night. First, Minnesota State Senator Jim Hoffman and his wife, where Boelter allegedly presented himself as a police officer wearing a silicone face mask. The Hoffmans didn't believe him. Investigators say Boelter forced his way in and shot the couple, who are expected to survive.
It's no exaggeration to say this is the stuff of nightmares.
From there, Boelter visited 2 other homes. One lawmaker wasn't home. Police say they spotted him parked near another's house, but he appears to have been scared off. Later, when officers arrived to check on Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, they saw Boelter outside. He opened fire and rushed inside.
He repeatedly fired into the house, and when he entered, he murdered Representative Hortman and her husband.
All told, investigators recovered a list of 45 potential targets from Boelter, all of them Democrats.
This cannot be the norm. It cannot be the way that we deal with our political differences.
At a growing memorial to the victims, there is shock and despair.
It's just the fact that this is where we are as a country. It's really tore me up.
The alleged actions of one man have rattled a state that was already among the most politically divided in America. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
You're looking at the beautiful Kananaskis Valley, home of this year's G7 summit. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to Banff. As world leaders meet nearby in Kananaskis, Canadian premiers and U.S. governors were also face-to-face in Boston today, talking economic ties and underscoring that leaders on both sides of the border want a U.S.-Canada trade deal.
And this shows unity. And I can tell you, after our talk and we build relationships, we're all united here. We are all united. All from different political stripes, by the way, in different countries.
Ontario's premier is joined by Atlantic premiers and New England governors. They discuss the impact of Trump's tariffs and opportunities to collaborate on energy, trade, tourism, and manufacturing. There is news tonight about federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He will face a mandatory leadership review in January. Poilievre lost his seat and lost the election earlier this year. Sources have confirmed to Global News the vote will take place at a Conservative Party policy convention in Calgary. If a leader does not resign after an election loss, the Conservative Party's constitution requires members vote on whether that leader should stay. Poilievre is set to run in a by-election in the Alberta riding of Battle River Crowfoot, though no date has been set for that. Next, with Canada on the world stage for the G7, how prepared is Mark Carney to meet this moment? There are lots of picturesque places near here, like Two Jack Lake with Mount Rundle rising above it. We're back from Banff in a moment. Welcome back to Banff, Alberta. This G7 summit is a big moment for Canada's Prime Minister. Mark Carney has set lofty goals of elevating Canada's position on the world stage, making it the strongest economy in the G7 and weaning it off its dependence on the U.S. A big part of his strategy is cultivating deeper relationships with other countries, and meeting that will be his first big test. It's his first international summit as Canada's Prime Minister, but this is far from Mark Carney's first rodeo. As former head of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, he's been to multiple meetings like this.
This is actually his sweet spot. I've seen him at G7 and G20 meetings and things personally over the years. He really knows this space.
Carney has experience, credentials, and high-level contacts.
We certainly have a prime minister with gravitas. There is momentum. There is clear desire to get things done.
He's focused on implementation, I think, in a more direct way than Prime Minister Trudeau was. So he's going to drive hard on things.
Expanding the guest list to include 7 countries that are not part of the G7, including India, Mexico, and Brazil, suggests Carney intends to deliver what he promised in his victory speech on election night, pivoting away from reliance on the U.S.
We have many, many other options than the United States to build prosperity for all Canadians.
Canada, Carney has said, needs to think big and act bigger. And this is his chance to cultivate deeper relationships beyond the U.S.
Canada can work towards a new international set of partnerships that are more secure, prosperous, just, and free.
Canada's last prime minister didn't talk like that, nor did the one before that.
We've lost 25 years. We haven't just lost 10. We haven't just... And I would pin that on significant attitudinal complacency. Donald Trump has woken up a significant realization that we can't be complacent anymore.
But the U.S. president is also a wild card. He did choose to wear a Canada-U.S. pin today, and though he hinted a trade deal might be possible, he called himself a tariff guy, and Carney can't afford to rile him.
So I think it'll be a non-threatening or confrontational kind of conversation about Canada diversifying, while at the same time trying to get deals with the U.S. as best as we can.
The advice from the man who was prime minister when the G7 was last held in Kananaskis, Jean Chrétien, says if Trump gets mad, keep calm.
He tends to be a bully once in a while, and don't lose your cool when you have a bully in front of you, unless you grab him by the neck, as I had to do one time.
A joke, of course. Chrétien believes it is always better to talk, even with leaders you don't agree with. And so far, Carney appears to be mastering that. That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Here at Canada is right here. Wildlife coexists with people around here. It's always milling around Kananaskis, Alberta. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here tomorrow as the G7 summit wraps up. For now, bye-bye.